So this module is going to cover the Pathfinder in Illustrator. And the Pathfinder is a tool that allows you to add and subtract shapes together. To illustrate this, I think I'll start with sort of a classic example of an apple. Okay, so let's say this circle is what I want to start with, and I want to create sort of an apple-like shape from this. So I'm going to use my standard Illustrator editing tools and make some changes to this circle until I begin to approximate the apple shape that I'm looking for. So I'm holding down Option now so I can change the direction of that path. Not sure why that's separated there. Undo a little bit. Okay, I'm going to say that's close enough to being an apple. And what I want to do now is to create a bite out of this apple. So I can use a circle to imagine what that bite might look like. I could just stack a series of these circles on top of each other to simulate the tooth marks. Okay. So the first thing I want to do is I want to create a shape of these four circles together so that this ends up looking like a bite out of an apple. Okay. So I'm going to just select each of these. I'm holding down Shift and clicking on them. And I'm going to find my Pathfinder. And if it's not on your screen, just go up to Window, like most tools, and Pathfinder. That's going to bring up all of these options. I would say the ones you'll use the most often are the first two. So this is Unite, and this is Subtract Front. This is an intersection. So this is going to leave the center of two objects, and this is going to leave the outside of two objects and remove the intersection. These are all divisions, so these will divide shapes based on how they're overlapped. Depending on which one you click on, it will do different things. The first thing I want to show you is the combine. So actually I'm going to hold down Option and just drag a couple copies of this around my screen so we can illustrate different versions of this. I'm going to select these again and click this first one. And that's going to create sort of a bubble shape. Like this could be a good way to create clouds in a scene or something like that. But that looks pretty close to a bite mark to me. I can now manipulate this a little further if I want to. Hold down and stretch things a little bit. I could use this tool and skew it a little bit. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that shape. And now I'm going to select both of these, and I'm going to use this second option. I'll just click that, and that subtracts the front object from the back object. So this is a Boolean feature. So if you know anything about 3D software or mathematical operations, a Boolean is a mathematical operation used to unite or subtract features from one another. So the Pathfinder can be really, really useful for creating shapes. If I were to select all of these now and do this intersect feature, it's going to yell at me because it only works with two overlapping paths. Okay, so to bring those together and show you what it's doing, I'm going to copy this out here. So if I took these two circles, you can see this one's on top of this one, and used this intersect feature, what I'm going to end up with is this football or lemon shape that was the in-between overlapping area. And if I use the other one, I'm going to end up with a shape that what it's actually doing is if I fill this shape with a swatch color, you can see what it's doing is making a shape that has sort of a compound path where it's removed that overlapping section. Okay. Now let's try this division piece right here. So I've clicked that. What has that done for us? Well, what it's actually done, has created a group of these objects. If I go up to Object Ungroup now, each of these objects is a separate piece. So it's used every overlapping section to create a separate component that I can now bring out, drag away, and manipulate. So if you had something like, some sort of explosion happening or something like that, where something's being cut into a bunch of pieces, maybe that would be useful. The second one is doing the same thing right now. If I look in outline mode, go ahead and hit undo. It's actually, rather than cut it into so many pieces, it's looked at the way things are stacked on top of each other, and now it's created a separate piece of this one, separate piece of this one, separate piece of this one, and a separate piece of this one. So not quite the amount of destruction that this one has, that this original one had. And you can see it's completely removed our stroke for whatever reason. I'll go ahead and put that back. Put the stroke back on. And make a couple more copies of this. So that's united all of those together. And of course, if you hover over any of these, it's going to give you a description. So this is merging all the objects regardless. This is trimming. This is dividing, crop, outline, and minus back. So this is subtract front. This is subtract back. Okay. This is going to merge objects together. This is going to crop objects. So it's looking at all the objects in the thing and the scene and finding the pieces that are overlapping. And it's cropping those down to just that topmost object. So this is the object that was on the top. If I made this bigger and did that again, it's going to use that top object to crop everything underneath it. Okay. And outline is just ungroup that. Has converted everything to actual lines. So rather than exploding it out into shapes like this one has done, it's cut things into individual vector lines. And it looks like it's broken it at a lot of the nodes. Any place anything was overlapping, it's broken that into a separate vector line. And the last one, subtracting back. So it's subtracting everything in the back from the front object. So if I have these two objects, two circles, and I do subtract back, it's going to remove the back one from the front one rather than removing the front one from the back one like this one does. Okay. So just a quick overview of the different options within the Pathfinder. Again, I think you'll probably find yourself using these first two more than any of the others. You may find divide to be useful in some instances if you wanted to add a lot of color to different objects. But now, since we have the Pathfinder, or the live paint object in the recent versions of Illustrator, that's become less important than it has been in the past.